From Granite State Report. 3 presidents died on the 4th of July. The math says miracle. The history says something better. Adams and Jefferson died hours apart on the 50th Independence Day. 5 years later, James Monroe made it 3. Do the arithmetic and the coincidence stops looking supernatural and starts looking human. This reading is by a synthetic voice. On the morning of July 4th, 1826, 2 old men were dying 3 states apart, and neither one knew about the other. At Monticello, Thomas Jefferson slipped away at about 10 minutes before 1 in the afternoon, age 83. 500 miles north in Quincy, Massachusetts, John Adams held on into the evening before he was gone too, age 90. It was the 50th anniversary, to the day, of the Declaration of Independence the two of them had argued into existence in a Philadelphia summer half a century earlier. The timing was so clean that the country reached straight for the supernatural. Pulpits called it providence. Statesmen called it a sign. 2 centuries later, we still pass the story around like a campfire tale. The author of the Declaration and its loudest champion, gone on its golden jubilee, within hours of each other, by what could only be the hand of God. Here is what the story usually leaves out. The math that makes it look like a 1 in 100,000 miracle is the wrong math. And the history sitting underneath that math is more interesting than any miracle. The 2 deaths. Adams and Jefferson met as delegates to the Continental Congress and were assigned together to the 5-man committee that drafted the Declaration. Jefferson, at Adams's urging, wrote the draft. They went on to lead opposing parties, fell into a bitter 11-year silence after the election of 1800, and then, as old men, talked their way back into friendship through a long correspondence that ran until the week they died. Both knew the anniversary was coming, and both seemed to be steering for it. Jefferson, feverish and fading, woke on the evening of July 3rd and asked the people at his bedside a single question: "Is it the 4th?" His doctor told him it soon would be. Jefferson lasted until the next afternoon. His family later said Adams, hundreds of miles away and unaware that his old rival had already died, spoke his own last words about the same man. Thomas Jefferson survives. He was wrong by a few hours. The line stuck anyway. Both quotes deserve an asterisk, and we are giving them one. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation, which runs Monticello, is blunt that Jefferson's exact last words cannot be pinned down. 3 eyewitnesses left 3 slightly different versions, and the tidy one about the 4th survives partly because a deathbed line about the 4th is exactly the kind of meaning people go looking for. Adams's words come from family recollection, and the wording shifts from source to source. The deaths are documented to the hour. The dialogue is remembered, not recorded. Then it happened again. 5 years later, on July 4th, 1831, James Monroe died in New York City at age 73 after a long decline. He was the 5th president, a Revolutionary War officer, and the last of the founding generation to hold the office. With that, 3 of the country's first 5 presidents had died on the same date on the calendar. That sealed the legend. Daniel Webster had already delivered a joint eulogy for Adams and Jefferson, telling a grieving public that the timing was too perfect to be accident, and a lot of people believed him. Monroe's death in 1831 read as confirmation. The Republic, the thinking went, was not just lucky. It was chosen. The calendar plays both directions, though, and the other half of the coincidence is easy to forget. The only president ever born on the 4th of July is Calvin Coolidge, who arrived in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, in 1872, 1 state over from here. 3 presidential deaths and 1 presidential birth on the same square of the calendar. Strange. Not, it turns out, impossible. It helped that 1826 was primed for omens. The country was 50 years old and watching its founders die off one by one, unsure whether a republic could outlast the men who built it. A pair of those men leaving together on the Jubilee was exactly the reassurance a nervous young nation wanted, and people took it as proof that the experiment carried heaven's signature. The reading says less about probability than about what the audience needed to see. So what are the odds? Start with the version that makes the story sound miraculous. If a person were equally likely to die on any day of the year, the chance of dying on one specific date is 1 in 365, a little under 0.3%. For two specific people to die on the same specific date, you multiply, roughly 1 in 133,000. Stated that way, Adams and Jefferson look like a coin landing on its edge. That number is a cheat, for 3 reasons. First, nobody picked July 4th in advance. We noticed the pattern after it happened, then calculated the odds of the pattern we had already seen. Run that trick on any date, and you can manufacture a miracle. Second, deaths are not spread evenly across the year. Old and frail people in the 1820s died disproportionately in the summer heat, and both men were very old and visibly failing. Third, the two were not independent flips of a coin. Both were near death in the same season, and both, by every account, knew the date was bearing down on them. Then there is the problem of scale. Stretch the window to 2.5 centuries and dozens of founders, presidents, and signers, and a collision with one famous date stops being a long shot and edges toward inevitable. The arithmetic of one named pair on one named day is tiny. The arithmetic of something eventually lands on the 4th is not. We remember the hit and forget the thousands of ordinary death dates that meant nothing at all. Here is the framing that earns the chill, and it needs no bad arithmetic. By the summer of 1826, only 3 of the 56 men who signed the Declaration were still living: Adams, Jefferson, and Charles Carroll of Maryland. 2 of those 3 died on the same day, and the day was the anniversary. Carroll, the last survivor, lasted until November 1832. That is the uncanny part, and it does not require you to pretend the deaths were random draws. Can a person die on schedule? The intuition that the dying can hold on for a wedding or the birth of a grandchild is old and widely shared. In the 1970s, and again in a 1990 paper, the sociologist David Phillips reported data suggesting that deaths dip just before a meaningful occasion and spike just after, a pattern he called the death dip. If that were real, it would explain a lot about 2 founders expiring on cue. It did not hold up cleanly. Later reanalyses found the effect small, inconsistent, and in some studies reversed. Several found people are more likely to die around their birthdays, not less, an anniversary reaction rather than a reprieve. A 2004 review of the whole literature concluded that no study had convincingly shown anyone can postpone death by force of will. Some terminally ill people clearly do make it to the wedding or the homecoming. Whether they are choosing to is something the science has never managed to prove. None of that means the will to live is nothing. Doctors and hospice nurses will tell you they have watched a patient wait for a face to arrive and then let go within the hour. The honest position is narrower than the legend. Those stories are real, and the data has never been clean enough to turn them into a law. For Adams and Jefferson, what we can state for certain is modest and still remarkable. They wanted the date. They reached it. What the rest of it meant was decided by the living. So the Adams and Jefferson story lands where it should. 2 men who had spent 50 years insisting the 4th of July meant something. One of them asking out loud whether it had arrived. Ran out of time at nearly the same moment on the day they cared about most. Real chance, with 2 human beings who had organized their whole lives around a single date. No miracle required. What is left is truer than a miracle and more useful. New Hampshire signers got no such exit. The poetic deaths went to the famous. New Hampshire sent 3 men to sign the Declaration, and none of them got the storybook ending. Josiah Bartlett of Kingston, a physician who would become the state's first governor, died on an ordinary day in May 1795. William Whipple of Portsmouth, a sea captain turned militia general, died in 1785. Matthew Thornton of Londonderry, who reached Philadelphia too late to vote on independence, but signed the document anyway, died on June 24, 1803, 10 days short of the date that would have turned him into a legend. They died on unremarkable mornings, because that is how nearly everyone dies. The republic they signed onto did not need their exits to be symbolic. It needed them to do the work, and they did it. The constitutions, the courts, the long, unglamorous business of standing up a government and keeping it standing. The argument those men started, over who governs and how and who gets a say, is still running, including here in New Hampshire, where the same fight now plays out in town meetings and school boards and every race for the corner office. The 4th of July did not kill 3 presidents, and the heavens did not open to collect Adams and Jefferson on schedule. What happened is rarer and more worth keeping. 2 very old founders who had told the country for half a century that the date mattered happened to prove it with the timing of their own deaths, and a country hungry for a sign read one into the coincidence. 250 years on, the monument that counts is not the eerie calendar. It is that we are still arguing, loudly and in public and on purpose, about what those men wrote. That argument is the inheritance. The barbecue is optional. That was a Granite State Report analysis. The full article, with its sources and fact check, is at granitestatereport.com.